Hey everyone, this is Jeff, and you're listening to a bonus episode of Irenicast. This is actually going to be our very first interview for the show, and normally we would release this as part of our regular programming. However, with all of the national protests going on about race, particularly in Baltimore, and in light of our conversation on Tuesday, we decided it would be a good idea to release this interview early. We've all been inspired by this conversation, and we hope that it inspires you to go deeper. So please enjoy and let us know what you think. And you can do that by following us on Twitter at Irenicast, liking us on Facebook at facebook.com/Irenicast, and of course, emailing the podcast at podcast@Irenicast. So without any further ado, on the other side of the music, our very first Irenicast interview.
Hello, everyone. This is Mona from Irenicast. Earlier this week, we did an episode on racism, and we thought there was so much to talk about. We wanted to get another voice in and keep talking and having these conversations. So I'd like to introduce you, my friend, Mariama.
Hi.
Welcome, Mariama. So you are one of the first people I thought about to come on and help enhance the conversation that the three white folks tried to have earlier in the week. And we named how awkward this is for us to try to talk about, because I think we're really conditioned not to talk about it in a lot of ways.
It's true.
Yeah. Thank you for affirming that, because I feel a level of anxiety. That's strange, even because I study this stuff in school and I've studied it for several years, but that doesn't mean that it's easy to get away from, you know? So I asked you to come on today because I think you have an amazing energy and so much wisdom and experience that I wanted to hear from you and what you're passionate about and what drives you forward. So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. And I want to thank you for also addressing this issue. I think you're right. I think it's a tough issue. It's a tough issue on all sides. But I think that we don't move forward unless we just face it head on. And so I'm thankful for this opportunity to share a little bit of what I know and what I've experienced. And hopefully that folks who are listening to the podcast keep the conversation going, engage with their friends. I hope it's a platform for them to move the conversation beyond just us. So my name is Mariama, and I live in Boston. I grew up here, and I want to just start by saying I feel like I had an amazing experience. I don't think I always appreciated how rich of a legacy that was given to me by my family. So I grew up in a church starting in Cambridge in St. Paul AME Church. I am a member of the African Methodist Episcopal tradition, which is a very rich tradition and has shaped me in a lot of really powerful ways. But I grew up in a church where the members of our church had started a school. And the school was, at the time that I was growing up, it was a predominantly Black school, Afrocentric school. And I grew up getting to meet Rosa Parks. She came to our school, visited. We reenacted the bus boycott for her, which later in life I realized she already knew what happened, so we didn't really need to reenact it for her. But okay, we were like little kids at 4 years old, showing her how we were so proud of how she had been willing to take a stand. And so my church community was really strong, really super supportive. I felt very affirmed there. And so truthfully, it wasn't until I think I was like maybe 4 or 5 the first time I encountered racism. So I knew there was difference. It's not that I didn't understand that. In fact, my parents were, tutors at a college. So I saw people of lots of different kinds of backgrounds. But I had really positive experiences with most of them. I was a little kid on a college campus. Everybody loves a little kid on a college campus. Totally. And so it was only when I was in the train station one time with my grandmother waiting for the train. And there was another little girl there waiting with her grandmother. And, we were both sort of bored. So we started playing on the floor, sharing our toys back and forth. And her grandmother looked over and noticed and snatched her away and said, "We don't play with those kind of people."
Oh my God.
And so I then went to my grandmother and said, "Grandmother, that's what she said. Like, what did she mean?" And my grandmother said, "Well, there are some people, they just hold on to these bad ideas. The way she explained it to me is that like racism was like a sickness. And so it was almost like we should feel bad for them because her grandmother was holding on to this like bad thing that she shouldn't be holding on to. And so it's funny because now I really do think of how so many of the divisions we create are based on fear, and they're actually in many ways a sickness. And it's not just race. There's lots of different, things that hold us back from fully understanding ourselves and each other. But I grew up in that space where I felt super affirmed to be who I am. I knew the first Black astronaut. He was a member of my church.
Wow.
Unfortunately, he died in the Challenger crash, but it was amazing to grow up in this environment where I didn't think that being Black had any way of holding me back. In fact, I thought of this rich tradition that I came from, of all these people that looked like me who had done amazing things. And so in many ways, I was proud of who I was. At this point in my life, I'm really thankful for that. But I recognize that part of the way that happened was that my parents kind of formed this protective bubble around me so that I didn't have to see what I later found the real world was like. The real world wasn't a place where little Black girls thought they could be president. That was in my bubble of a world. I'm thankful for that bubble now in my life. But I've had to struggle over the past, basically, almost, 25, 30 years to understand, why do I live in a world where when people look at me, they don't imagine my possibilities are endless? What does it mean when a Black person dies and it doesn't feel like it's taken as seriously as when a white person dies? I grew up knowing that even in slavery, my people had contributed amazingly to this country. I learned that in my Afrocentric preschool. And then I struggled to find myself in textbooks for the rest of my life and most of the rest of the schools that I went to. So
even thinking about what it means to teach a 4 or 5-year-old about the institution of slavery, that's kind of amazing that even has to be.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the way we learned about it was just like, this is an example of how our people have survived and overcome, But yeah, as I got older, I learned a lot more of the painful side, and that's been its own journey. So it's a challenge. And I think this last year, this whole question of whether or not Black Lives Matter has really caused things that I've been struggling with, thinking about, working through my whole life to resurface in some really poignant ways. And it's a challenge to watch the way that in some ways the country has changed. In some ways, the country is really still struggling. And I think a big part of it is, like you highlighted at the very beginning, we struggle to even talk about these issues. And so what I think I want to point out that's one of the first problems, I think, is that the history of racism is so full of pain, not just for Black people. It means everybody has to look at the ways that we've been complicit in things that are not right. The way that our grandparents didn't always make decisions that we wish they would have made now. How we yesterday made a decision that we're going, that might not have been the right decision. And so I think we get so afraid that if we open the conversation, that we're going to be blamed, that we're going to look bad, that we're not going to know what the other people are talking about. So we just better to not have the conversation. The problem with that is that just leaves the status quo as it is.
Yeah.
And so for me, for instance, it means that the things that really matter to me, because they're painful for somebody else, they don't get talked about at all. And so the first thing I think that's a real problem is denial. denial can hurt just as much as opening something up and not fully being able to deal with it. I mean, I know as a woman, I know I have known young people who have been sexually abused. Mm-hmm. The sexual abuse is awful. What's even worse is when you go to tell someone in your family and they either deny that it happened, mm-hmm. or they
treat you like
they admit that it might happen, but they are like, we don't want to talk about it. Let's just put it behind us. Yeah. Right. And so what it says is, because of the pain it causes me to deal with this, it would be better for me if you would suffer in silence.
So there's no place to grieve. There's no place to express emotion or be angry or work through it.
Right. And so I think that problem of being told that you should keep that to yourself, or we don't have the space or the time to talk about that, does breed a level of anger. And so I think when a lot of people, I've been thinking about this a lot in the context of Baltimore, and people are going, I don't get it. That's so unproductive. Why are they doing that? And I do think it's unproductive, and I can talk a little bit about why and what I wish was different.
The rioting in particular?
The rioting and that's happened in Baltimore in the last couple of days, or what happened in Ferguson when people took to the streets. I think a lot of people look at that and they go, how is that making it any better for them to be out there and be angry? And I think what they don't recognize is that what people are saying is, look at this. I need you to look at this. I need you to not say, oh, well, we can't talk about that because it's a contentious issue. I think if we would actually talk about it, we could release some of the pain. We could also begin to work for solutions. And we can't work for solutions for something that we're not even talking about. And so what you see is a lot of young people, many of whom did not have the same kind of experience that I did, many of whom have gone to schools or look at television, and all they see is negative images of themselves day after day after day, and no acknowledgement that hurts. It is painful. It means that when you go to apply for a job, people ask in the back of their head, are you like the robber that they saw on the television news? Or they have one image of what Blackness is, and no matter how hard you try to be yourself, you get cast as someone else, right? And I'm sure all of us know how difficult it is to be misunderstood. What if you're always misunderstood by a lot of people, and a lot of the people that have the power to control your life and make decisions about your destiny? So I think, it's been hard. I think I've had conversations with some of my friends, particularly some of my white friends, that are like, I just don't understand why people are reacting that way. And what I've tried to explain is, if you keep feeling like you're ignored and ignored and ignored, eventually that anger bubbles over.
I think it was Martin Luther King who said, a riot is a protest that goes unheard, or something to that effect, right? Mm-hmm. I've been seeing that pop up on Facebook and stuff, but it seems like there are clusters of my friends who will really try to talk about this, even if they don't do it perfectly. Yeah. But there are other people who just say, I don't even want to touch it. I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to look at cat videos or whatever. I don't know. I don't know how you can ignore it. And I'm thankful for the timing of this, because when we scheduled this interview, Baltimore had not erupted yet.
It's true.
And I think that having this additional space to talk about this is really meaningful. So thank you so much. And thank you for explaining that in a way that is easy to relate to. One of the things we realized when having this conversation is that racism is a shifty thing to nail down.
Yeah.
There are so many different factors that it's almost impossible to distill it as a single thing. Like talking about race without talking about poverty, talking about race without talking about incarceration, talking about, or about gender dynamics. There's so many things. And the academic word for that would be intersectionality, which is not a word that a lot of people know. That I find it a really useful word.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about what that word means?
Yeah. I mean, I think what it means is what I think a lot of us know is that everything is connected. I use the example of when a relationship falls apart. Usually it's a series of things that just keep building on themselves. It's not all, there's some times where it's just one thing, like somebody cheated, right? But a lot of times it's a bunch of places where you haven't been able to come to agreement, and those things keep building on themselves. Like when I've worked with couples, sometimes I find that the number one issue is often communication, right? Mm-hmm. So 5 different things happen, but because they couldn't talk about any of them, the one thing led to the other thing, made the other thing seem worse. And so I think intersectionality for me is about the reality that we as humans are in a relationship with each other, right? And there's a bunch of things that are making us fall apart. And one of the core things is that we can't talk about any of them. So there's this communication issue. So for me, I use the examples like I don't wake up in the morning and say, today I'm a Black person, tomorrow I'm a woman. And then the day after that, I'm something else. Like I'm all those things at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so I experience all of any one person or any one system's reaction to all of the different parts of who I am. You can't break them apart. Yeah. And so I think for me, intersectionality is about going back to the realization that we are full people, that we're one human species with a whole bunch of problems that connect to each other. Mm-hmm. In funky and interesting ways at times. So it's not just one thing. We have a general problem around communication. We have a general problem around fear of the other. Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of things that we are fearful of. Different of us are fearful of different things, but every one of us struggles with that.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really well said. That's helpful. Because there's all like the theoretical academic speak, and then there's like what you were able to do is just put it into real life, which is awesome. So some of the rhetoric I hear often in the in the media or whatever is rhetoric really against claiming oppression or victimization. Mm-hmm. Have you heard this kind of thing? Yeah. And I think for people who don't experience these systems of oppression, what we're calling it, or these kind of day-to-day aggressions, or just feeling like somebody always is deciding who you are before really getting to know you, all of that. Unless you really experience that personally, it's hard to understand. So I don't know, what do you make of that?
So, I think the way I look at it is, say we're actually trying to fix something. The first thing you have to do is acknowledge what's broken. Mm-hmm. Because if you can't acknowledge what's broken, then you might fix it in a way that makes absolutely no sense.
Great point.
So I think there's 2 realities. One, some of the healing can come when people will acknowledge the damage. So there's some things that have happened that cannot be fixed. Slavery cannot be fixed. It happened, right? People who go to jail unjustly for 40 years, you can't give them the 40 years back. Mm-hmm. So there's some injustices that have happened that cannot be restored. But at least if you can acknowledge that it happened, say, you know what, I'm really sorry because that never should have happened. Then that gives us a place on which for me to say, thank you. We can't fix what happened, but you saying that you feel that way helps me to build a relationship with you that makes me think that maybe, just maybe, we could change it moving forward. Yeah. But it's hard for me to believe you want to change it moving forward if you want to sweep under the rug what happened. When all you have to do is just say, I'm sorry that happened. Mm-hmm. If people can't even take the step to say, let's have a moment of silence. Let's acknowledge this. That's a really pretty tiny step. And so
a lot.
Right. It means a lot. It's a healing step. But it also means if you can't even say that, which doesn't actually make you any pain right now, then how am I supposed to trust that you might be willing to take further steps that might be difficult, that might require you to give up some things, that might require you to let go of some things? How do I believe you will do that if you can't even do the step that's just saying, I'm sorry?
So it's trust building.
Yeah. It's about that relationship. Mm-hmm. It's about that restoration. Mm-hmm. And again, I use relationship examples a lot because they're things we've all experienced. Mm-hmm. I knew someone who went through an experience of being cheated on, right? Mm-hmm. And there was this deep tension because I felt like her husband was like, I did this. I'm sorry. Now let's move on. And he didn't want to talk about it. And it actually continued to get worse because ultimately it felt like he wanted to, in 2 seconds sort of say it and move on and everything go back to normal. And it probably could never exactly go back to normal.
Right.
They had a whole process that they needed to go to rebuild the trust. And he wouldn't acknowledge that. And so, I think we all know when people are sincerely sorry and when they're not.
Yeah.
And so when you feel like a person isn't really that sorry, you're going to stay sort of focused on that first piece. I need to know that you really, really, really feel sorry enough that actually you're not going to do it again. Right?
Fair.
And so I think for a lot of Black people, it's like, I need to know that you're sorry enough about what's happened in the past. Because if you can't even be sorry about that, that we can't fix. So how do I know you're not going to do it again?
So now my white brain thinks my ancestors never owned slaves. You know what I mean? And so I've heard this a lot, and I am sorry. I want to say that, but I also, there's a level of knowing that like, I would never will that to happen. You know what I mean? So, and I've heard other people say this is part of white guilt, right? This is trying to just deal with the present realities.
Right. So legacies are still really real though. It's an example. We say things like our founding fathers. That's not your father. In fact, you're probably not at all related to them if you really do your family tree. But you feel like you own them because they feel like they're part of your legacy. You got to own the good and the bad sides of things, right? So if you benefit from some of the injustices, right, you got to own that. You've got to own that our systems, like when people look at you, they see something different than when they look at me. Even though you didn't say, let's make it this way.
Right. Yeah.
You're still a part of it.
And I still benefit from it.
Right. So it's the same way that a lot of us, we are Americans. We can't divorce ourselves from that. Am I responsible for what everybody in America does? No. But when I go abroad and I hear people say things, I need to hear from them. I need to engage with the reality that I am a symbol of my country. And I've chosen to be that symbol. Every day I, apply for my passport and I call myself American. So I can't just take the good sides of America, like, our founding fathers and our Constitution, and then be like, oh, that other stuff, like, that's not my responsibility. So even when I leave and I'm talking with people from other places, I take responsibility even for the bad sides of America that, quite frankly, at that particular time, I would have been a slave. But I need to honor that if I'm going to call myself that, I have to embody all of it and challenge it. Yeah. And challenge it. I'm not saying just take it wholesale, but
a lot of us feel the same with our families too. Like the same way you would take responsibility for your family.
Right.
We're all interlinked. And this is why I think what you're saying is so profound, because there is something so healing about communal confession, of coming together and saying, okay, I'm more than an individual. I'm part of this bigger web of people. And we all need to collectively take responsibility.
Right.
I would like to go back to a point where you were talking about when your proverbial bubble broke. Do you mind talking more about that? I know you have a background in community organizing, and I'd like to hear about that too, whatever you feel like talking about. But what was that like for you to realize this way I grew up was not the way things are for most people?
Right. So, wow. Okay. So it was a process of coming into that. So my grandmother came from the South. She was part of the large group of African Americans over time that migrated from the South to the North. She'd grown up in Virginia and then moved to the North, right? So I really believe it was in the 7th grade that I can really remember this real big shift. And it was 2 things happened at the same time. One, I became really aware of what was going on in South Africa. That was the first action I ever took was to boycott Coca-Cola because they were in South Africa. They were supporting apartheid in South Africa, okay. Right? Yeah. And so I stopped drinking all Coke products. And I remember I went to camp at a place where they only had Coke products, so I had to drink water all summer.
But you were like a cradle activist. Look at you go.
It was, yeah. And that was one of my first sort of moments. I also, in that same year, started going to a predominantly white school. And so I encountered people, and not necessarily maliciously, but saying things like, I've had people like touch my hair and say like, that's so different, and not realizing that you're like petting me like a dog, right? Like it's weird to walk up and just like touch somebody's hair. It's like considered, it's like disrespectful.
Zero boundaries.
Right.
Zero.
But people would feel totally comfortable doing that.
Wow.
And, people would make statements about my neighborhood, like, oh, I can't visit because it's so violent. And it's like, you don't know anything about my neighborhood. Like, clearly I get here to school every day without getting shot. My parents were both doctors. Like, it was just really challenging to have people have a sense that they knew who you were. Like, I didn't think I knew any of them. It was like the beginning of school. I don't know you. I'm not going to know you until I get to know you.
Yeah.
But people would imagine that they knew things about me without actually having talked to me. Right. So that was a challenging experience. I suddenly realized that, not that I never knew this, I had a deep sense of community, but like people didn't see me as Mariama, as a unique God created person. They saw me as that Black girl. And I experienced that. And again, this was not malicious. People didn't come up and like spit on me or they didn't even realize that they were doing it. People would touch my hair and not even calculate that. Like, what I eventually started doing was like just touching them back. And then suddenly they would go, wow, that was so weird to have someone touch me. And it's like, it's just as weird for you as it was for me just now. Because it helped them to see, like, in that moment, I didn't even have to talk to them.
Yeah.
I'd just be like, let me touch your, like, your hair is really interesting. How do you get it to be that flat? And people would be like, oh, I just assumed that mine is the normal. You know what I mean? Like, it clicked in their head that they were exoticizing me, right? And I didn't have to say, could you please stop like exoticizing me? I just touched them and responded as if they were exotic. And suddenly they were like, oh. So that was huge. But to be very honest with you, I went through a point where I was just really angry too. I went through a point in my life where, actually there was this Charles Stewart case in my neighborhood in Boston where a white man and a white woman were in a car together. She was pregnant. She was shot, and her husband said a Black man did it, just a ubiquitous Black man. And so they tore our communities apart looking for this Black man. Lots of people got locked up. And then he jumped off a bridge because he shot his wife.
Oh my God.
And what he knew was that if he said a Black man did it, nobody would pay attention to him as a potential suspect.
Wow.
And so, because one white guy, you see all the television shows, they say, you got to look at the husband or the boyfriend first, right? It's what you're supposed to do. I watch a lot of Law and Order. And it's always the husband. But anyway, so he should have been the natural first suspect. They should have been questioning him from the beginning.
Yeah.
But because he said a Black guy did it, he was protected as the victim, and his wife as the he was not. So there were all these things that were happening, and I was angry. I was really angry.
Because you saw close up.
I was watching people being arrested in my neighborhood.
Wow.
I was watching the big difference in opportunities of the girls I went to school with and people in my neighborhood. And I'm not knocking any of these girls, and I'm still friends with some of them. They were smart, but I knew people in my neighborhood who were also just as smart that didn't have any access to that school.
What kind of opportunities do you mean?
Our classroom size was like 12. I learned how to write in ways that I probably wouldn't have at many of the schools that my, other kids in my neighborhood were going to. We had opportunities to travel. We had, it just, educationally, I got the kind of education everybody should have been getting.
Yeah.
And so when I would go to this fancy school and then go home to my neighborhood, I saw this dissonance that was just wrong to me, because I knew those girls and the kids in my neighborhood, they weren't that different.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like one had so much greater capacity than the other. Some just had greater investment, more belief that they could do it.
Yeah.
Right. So, I learned about South Africa. I was in Haiti during a coup. And I wanted to understand, why was that happening? Like, why are people around the world suffering, and why are so many of them dark-skinned people, right? And nobody could answer that question to me satisfactorily. So I was also just generally mad about suffering in the world too.
Yeah.
But I was also angry that a disproportionate amount of that suffering was borne by people that looked like me. So I wanted to change everything. I mean, everything. I studied the Holocaust. I wanted to end anti-Semitism. I mean, you name it. Like, if there was an issue when I was in high school, I was like, sign me up.
Knowing you now and how broad your interests and passions are,
Yeah.
I mean, everything from like eco-justice to gender, I mean, everything, you have such like informed opinions about all of this that I can see that, like, as young Mariama.
Well, I think the reality is that I started seeing early on that all of this stuff is connected.
Yeah.
And I only later on came to a greater understanding that fear is at the basis of everything. Fear, and then a desire to control things. So it is part of a human challenge that we always want to feel like we're better than someone else. And this is all of us. Sometimes you walk down the street and you see somebody and you don't like their outfit, and you take a moment to like comment on it to somebody else. Now, why should you care? I should have more important things to think about in my life than what somebody else is wearing. But it's part of my human desire to feel better than somebody else.
Why are we all that insecure? Like, why can't we just live our lives and be content?
We got to work on it. But I'm not saying that everybody else is a problem. I see all of the things that I critique about other people. I see them in myself.
Yeah.
I think what makes me different, because people are like, oh my gosh, you're so like, it's not, I don't think I'm that unique of a person. What I think it is that a long time ago I said, I don't want to be part of any kind of oppression of other people. And so I've spent my life trying to understand that and trying as best I can to rid myself of the desire to control other people, to control myself, to control the world, and to not be afraid of anything. Because if I'm afraid of something, then I will act in foolish ways to deal with that fear. And I mean, I've seen that again. So I got connected with community organizing because I was involved. I was involved in this summer program that was looking at how we could change things in our neighborhood. And they chose me because I wanted to change everything all at once, right?
Yeah.
And so the group I was in was connected with another group called Project Hip Hop. And Project Hip Hop did this annual trip to the South to study the civil rights movement. And truthfully, somebody dropped out at the last minute. And they literally had to find someone in like 10 days. And so they called this program and said, hey, do you have any young people that might want to do this? And they were like, we think we have someone who might want to learn about the civil rights movement, who might be excited about that. And that trip changed my life.
Where did you go specifically?
We rode in vans from Boston all the way down to New Orleans and every place in between. We went to Memphis, we went to Birmingham, we went to Atlanta, we went to Washington, D.C. And what we really looked at was what was the civil rights movement about? Like, where did it come from? And most of the people we met with were people that you will never hear about in textbooks. They were everyday people in their communities who had all along wanted to see change, many of them. But some of them struggled by themselves in their communities and had a hard time getting people to get over their fear of getting involved. Some of them, like one of the organizers, Charles Sherrod, who's a famous organizer, says the truth is he showed up to the meeting because his now wife was going to be at the meeting, and he thought if he showed up, it would impress her. So
that's how it goes a lot more often. Maybe people are likely to admit.
So, what I saw in that, in addition to all, like, community organizing is a science. Some people ask, like, oh, why don't we just, get together? And sometimes you need the right conditions, right? You need the right level of anger. You need the right people, which is not to say that one shouldn't try, but it's just, people should not feel bad if the civil rights movement doesn't spark off tomorrow, because there was a lot of things that came together. And I've spent a lot of time studying that history. But what was at the foundation of it is that, truthfully, while it seemed oppression was winning, under the surface, there were a lot of people who wanted change, but they were afraid to stand up for fear, and really a justified fear, that if they stood up, they would be the only one to stand up, and then they would be taken out. And that's what often happened. I mean, the KKK did literally kill people who tried to challenge racism, or segregation in the South. So what I got away from that, in addition to all the learning, which I could talk about at some other time, is that people do often want to be brave. They do, underneath the surface, have hope that something could be better than what they're experiencing.
Yeah.
And that's not just oppressed peoples. It's more likely in oppressed peoples because they're on the bad end of the stick. But there are also a lot of people who would be considered, in the privileged group, who also want things to change. And they see that something is not quite right. They feel in their heart, this is not really the way it should be. But they become convinced, like, if I stick up, I'll lose something, or my family will get hurt.
They might have a lot to lose.
Right,
too.
right. Yeah. Or I'll stand up, nobody else will stand up, and all that will happen is I will have screwed myself, and nothing will have changed. The fear that you will get hurt and the fear that nothing will change are the two biggest things that stop people from moving forward. And so they hold on to this attitude, you know what? This is the way it is. It's never going to get any better. And once you use that as your justification, you can turn your eyes to things that you know are not right. You don't seek for a better world. And so for me, part of my faith is, I believe that God created people with a desire for something better. And I think there's a whole lot of reasons why they don't always function in that desire. But my question is, can I live my life in a way that even when I'm on the subway or I'm working with a young person, that one, I can see them the way that God sees them, as the beautiful and amazing and creative people that they are. And that maybe my believing that might make them believe it. And that maybe if I try to live as fearlessly as possible, other people who in their hearts already want to do this might look at me and say, well, gosh, if she can get out there, I might just join her. I believe many people want to see change happen.
Yeah.
But they just keep telling themselves that this is the best we can do.
Oof. Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe it's my faith, and maybe it's because I'm crazy, but I believe we can do so much better. And that's what the civil rights movement really taught me, is that once people begin to say, no, something better is possible, lots of other people began to join them.
I heard recently that courage is not having a lack of fear. It's moving in spite of your fear.
I believe that fully.
Yeah.
I mean, there are days. I do a lot of work around climate change. There are days when I'm like, Nothing's going to change. We're just all going to go down in a hurricane. But it's like, how could I live my life in a defeatist way? Like, what kind of life is that? It's not even, to me, that's not a life worth living, right?
Yeah.
So I don't operate from a Pollyanna sort of idea that racism is going to end in my lifetime. We're going to fix everything. And if I just keep trying harder. But what I do know is that there's a whole bunch of ancestors that went before me, people who literally were in chains. And what they prayed is that my life would exist someday. They knew that they were going to die slaves. And their only hope is that their descendants would live better. How can I dishonor that legacy? And how can I not live that way now when my situation is so much better than theirs? Like, if I can't have hope as the descendant of a slave who actually is able to own my own home and move freely, if I can't have hope, I mean, for me, it feels like spitting on their grave.
Wow.
I have to live with hope. And all I can do is what I can do in a lifetime. And who knows how long my lifetime is? I don't know if it ends tomorrow. I don't know if I got another 50 years in me. I don't know. Mm-hmm. All I know is I have to live each day in a way that honors both their legacy and then leaves something for the next generation, so that 50 years from now, there will be a little girl who says, how can I give up my ancestors? And she may not know my name, but she will know that her ancestors lived into the future for her to take it to the next place. I owe that to the people before me and the people after me.
It's just so profound. It's so profound to think that way and to live that way. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting that you talked about civil rights and fear and ordinariness, because I think there is kind of a mystique around civil rights, the way we talk about it. Yeah. Is that it's all extraordinary Black people. Right. But when you actually look at pictures of sit-ins and civil rights, there's a lot of different races and there's a lot of different colors of skins. It's very intercultural. It's very faith-based. It's very much ordinary people that went and sat on a floor somewhere to make a point, and it strikes me that we all, it's very easy to socially loaf in the age of Facebook. It's easy to just say, I'm going to put my little 2 cents in that. I have nothing else that I have to give, or want to give. So I'm going to ask a kind of a silly question for some of our listeners who might have been wondering. And actually, I didn't really know much at all about what this was a couple of years ago. So can you explain what community organizing actually is?
Oh, sure. When you do something for years, you kind of forget that it's like, totally. There was a time when I had never heard that term. So basically it's based on the things that I was just talking about. The idea behind community organizing is that there's a bunch of people who are separated. And because they are separate, they don't feel the power. They only can sense their own personal power. And when they look at their own personal power, they think that's not enough. Community organizing is the act of connecting people, each who feel something, right? So that they start to have a sense of collective power. So a lot of it is knocking on people's doors and having conversations with them, really listening to them. I mean, some of the importance of community organizing is just listening, because a lot of people go through their entire day and nobody listens to them. And this is not just Black people. This is all of us going through our day and nobody listens to us. So some of the work of community organizing is really listening to people and then saying, wow, I hear you really feel strongly about that. I got 5 other people that also feel that. You think we could come together? Right? And so, the foundation of community organizing is the belief that people want to make change, or at least a lot of us do. And what is holding them back is the sense of disconnectedness. So the work is to connect people so that they start feeling bold. I mean, it's what we see is like, most of us would never, tip over a car, right? Or at least most of the people I know, right? But then the Patriots win or your sports teams win, and then suddenly you're in this crowd of people who are acting like out of their minds.
Yeah.
The truth is that we find strength in numbers. We find ourselves more powerful when we feel connected to other people. And community organizing is the process of connecting people so that they can feel more powerful, so they can do something they didn't imagine that they could do. And that's not always fighting, right? Sometimes that's creating something in their community that they all wished would happen, but nobody by themselves could do it. And so they kept holding it out as just a wishful thinking. And suddenly they go, really? There's 15 of us who feel this way? You think we could take that to 100? Or do you think the 15 of us could start just doing this thing and maybe people would join with us? So that's the work. And so it's not it's not rocket science, but I also have to be honest, it's not always easy either.
Probably the logistics of it are very hard work.
Yeah. And some of it is to be a really good organizer, have to learn how to love people. 1, and 2, you have to learn the intricacies of relationship building, right? And some of us do that really well. Some of us struggle with that. Sometimes you have to build across difference. You have to get people who think that they know that other person to reconsider them in a different way. And sometimes you have to get people who don't agree on some big things to say, can we get some started on some things we do agree on? So it's, when you bring people together, it's not like they get in the room and they're like, oh my gosh, love and happiness and no issues.
No problem.
Right?
No drama.
Oh yeah. I mean, you put 3 people in a room and there's politics and drama. So it's about how to, connect with individuals, how to bring people together, how to help people move together.
Stay together.
Right.
Yeah.
Without being derailed by the things that happen as human beings. We misunderstand each other. I thought you said this. You thought we start moving in different directions, right? So you have to be a really strong facilitator, a really good listener. And then often people also end up having to challenge systems outside of themselves that are standing in the way of whatever it is that you want to get done. And so then you also have to learn how to deal with those people who aren't living in your neighborhood and don't see it the same way. How do I help you to care about this? What can I use to help you care about it a little deeper? With politicians, how can I help you to see that we may not vote for you if you don't come to this, So it's a lot about managing human dynamics to help us get to what I think many of us would like, which is a better future. But there's a lot, we all have the experience, if you've ever even planned a party with a couple of your friends, how working with other people can derail things really quickly.
Right. Well, what you're describing sounds a lot like ministerial work. And I know you are a minister at your church, right? And I think actually a lot of people don't know how rich the tradition of activism is in a lot of Black churches. And so it's interesting to me to hear you talk about all these different facets of your life, but how they all kind of come together.
It's interesting, it's the same way, you kind of don't always appreciate your family until you leave them. You don't realize how much you are just like your mother, who you told her that you couldn't stand her or whatever, I did grow up in the AME church, and our church has a very rich tradition of activism. We were started by a Black man who began his life as a slave, went to a Methodist revival, decided to become a Christian, then preached a sermon to his own slave master, who then said, I am going to allow all my slaves to work for their freedom. He didn't just free them right away, but he did allow them to work on other days. So our founder bought his own freedom and then had to teach himself to read with some help. So from the very beginning, his story was one of overcoming, but also one of really experiencing deep injustice. And so the very first thing our church did was oppose slavery. So we existed as a church more than almost 80 years before slavery actually ended.
Wow.
So there were our church was still growing even as slavery was existent in some of the places even where our churches were. And so what I think is powerful about our tradition, and I know, some listeners are Christian, some are not, but what I think is powerful to me about my particular tradition is we recognize that suffering happens in the world. We can't deny it because we've experienced it. We recognize racism has been around and it's probably not going to go away anytime in the near future. At the same time, we believe that the power of God can move to totally shift things. And so we are both deeply steeped in the reality of what is and holding out deep hope for radical change. And so we've always been really involved in social justice work because, as someone was saying it to me the other day, which I really like, I want to live into the world I think God wants anyway, right? And so, I'm going to push for that. I can't make anybody change, but I can keep saying, this is unacceptable. This is not good enough. We can do better. And so that's those tensions between accepting what is, believing that better is possible, and working for it. That's just what I grew up with as church. It's been interesting to me, as I've gone on to meet with other people and learn from other traditions, to realize that not everybody thought that social justice work was a part of what you do as a Christian.
Absolutely not.
I was like,
absolutely not.
Really?
That's the way I was raised. You just don't, that stuff stays outside the doors. That's secular work. That's, my tradition was very much like Jesus is coming back any day, and, don't sin too much. And, there's some good things about my tradition.
Yeah.
Too. I don't want to knock it, but really there wasn't any conversation around social justice at all.
And I don't see how we could have not talked about it, because we had people that couldn't come to church because they were enslaved. There's no way that we could accept that the world was the way it was supposed to be.
What about in more recent times? What keeps that fire lit, so to speak?
And I will be honest. We still do a lot, our church, but I also think there are times when we get complacent. We have ebbs and flows of activism in our church, right?
Well, that's human.
You're right.
Yeah.
But, in the church that I grew up in, I never thought it was possible to serve God any other way. If God blesses you to have life in this world, and you are given any level of privilege, and we all have some level of privilege, then your job is to work until everybody has a better life. It's hard for me because there was never a time in my life where I didn't believe that my service to God meant working for things to be better. That's just part of my faith, and I think of Jesus, if everything being crappy was okay, then why did Jesus need to, right? So for me, it's Jesus healed people who everybody else didn't care about. And Jesus walked with people who were struggling. Every once in a while, he went to a rich person's house and maybe had a break for a night or two. But in reality, he was constantly on the move, relieving people's suffering, speaking to their lives, and telling them the situation you're in is not okay. And if you look at it, a lot of times he didn't say because you are bad.
Yeah.
He critiqued the system that made it that way. So I truthfully don't know how to I consider myself a follower of Jesus. I don't know how to follow Jesus any other way than to be not just service, right? I'm not knocking service, but Jesus, the way I read Jesus, he actually lived among people who were struggling. He wasn't just hey, this is for you. Here's a penny, take it, he built authentic community with these disciples, some of whom were a hot mess and some of whom were struggling and some of whom, they were in all different kinds of places, right?
Mm-hmm. And he had really strong words for people in power.
Right.
Who abuse their power.
Right. So, I have never imagined a way to follow Jesus that didn't fight for change in the world, right?
Yeah.
And even if people are in power, I try not to demonize them, but I still have to hold them accountable. You are standing in the way of the better world that we need to have.
Ooh, yeah.
So I would love for you to join us. We can make this better world together, but I can't allow you to stand there without telling you that it's unacceptable.
Yeah. So how did all of this shape the type of community organizing that you chose to get into?
So the other thing in my life is I grew up in the Black church, and I used to sing. Yes, that is like a partial stereotype that all Black people sing, but in this case, I did used to sing. And I shouldn't say used to. I still love to sing. I just can't do it on the amount that I used to. Mm-hmm. So I've always loved the arts. I love to sing. I love to dance. I'm not a strong visual artist, but I envy them. And I love young people. I think that teenagers are at an amazing point in their life where if you help them to work through the questions that they have, you can help them to find a sense of purpose.
Which is what you found
right.
when you were a teen.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All of these experiences gave me a sense of purpose. And so I wanted to give back to other young people a sense of purpose. And I wanted to help them be creative because I felt like that was something that was important to me. So I actually ended up going back to take over Project Hip Hop. And I built up a lot with other people, a real artistic focus within the organization and what we believed, and we call it cultural organizing. And whatever, that's a jargon word that people may or may not know. But what we basically believed is that if you can change the way people think, or you can give them a spark of imagination that a better life is possible, that is important to the first step of getting them involved. Mm. And so we were allied with a lot of other community organizing groups, and our unique purpose, in addition to, we would participate in a lot of, our young people got involved in a lot of organizing work and did organizing work around specific issues that were important to them. But towards the latter years, our big focus was on creating art that would there was a quote that that would comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Yeah. That it would make people who were struggling have a sense of hope and dignity and be inspired to work for change, and people who were comfortable and not aware of a situation watch our art pieces and say, whoa, I had never even thought about that, but I need to go back and relook at my life, right?
And inspire them also to work for change.
Exactly. Yeah. So at the end, the hope is that everybody starts working for change. Yeah. So, I think, and sometimes it's easier, I learn so much when I watch somebody else do something that I'm like, that is a mess. And then I do it the next week and I'm like, and I guess I'm a mess too, right? So if somebody comes to you and they tell you, I think you need to change this, you're going to be like, well, you don't really know me and blah, blah, blah. But sometimes when you see somebody else do it and it annoys you, you go, oh. Yeah. And so the point of our art was to say, just take a look at this. Mm. And if you see yourself in here, or maybe you don't see yourself in here in a way that you think you should, maybe there's something you need to be doing about that. And I think that that's what is so powerful about art.
It's confrontational, but non-confrontational at the same time.
Exactly.
And everyone experiences it in their own way.
Exactly. It can confront you at a level that I don't think words can get through to.
Yeah.
Because we can put up our defenses against words, right? We can rationalize, blah, 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 blah. But sometimes when you see something in an art piece or you are in a performance, you're like, oh, it touched me. It touched me at a really deep place.
I'm thinking of Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou and so many artists of color who've been able to tap into that expression that's deeper than language.
Oh, Maya Angelou, I had the opportunity to meet her once. And she was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not that long. It was like, 5 minutes? Her warmth. Because, she was like in her private space. She was like traveling, and she could have been like, I'm trying to write a book. Like, but she stopped and she like encouraged us. And it was like myself and two friends. And, some of it is like, she's just an amazing person who had done the work. And I know that she has moved on. I don't believe, I know that people's bodies die. I don't believe that their spirits die. I believe that she is now among the ancestors. And, I think that there's a lot of artists that take seriously their responsibility to open hearts, to open minds, to help people to heal from wounds. I don't think all artists do that. There's been a lot of critique of hip hop artists. I have critiques of some, and I defend them also. That's really complicated. And hip hop was our main medium. We'd have to do a whole nother show to talk about hip hop. But what I did tell my young people is, your job is to create art that's not about you, about what you want to say, but that starts from the perspective of, what am I trying to say that will get people thinking?
Yeah.
You have to come partially from your experience, because that's what you're an expert in, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying leave yourself at the door. No, bring yourself fully. But give the same level of love and grace to other people that you want for yourself, and ask how you can create some art that pushes them. And that's a different space to create from. And I think a lot of artists, I shouldn't say a lot, there are quite a few popular artists today that I'm not sure that is the place that they start from. And I know there's a bunch of different ways to approach art, and I don't want to, knock anybody else's creativity. But I think that art is such a powerful tool that it feels somewhat wasteful to me. When the world is full of so many terrible things that need to be shifted, for artists not to be asking more about how they can bring their creativity to bear to change lives, shift our thinking, and get us inspired to create a better world. Sometimes that means reflecting on how things already are. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying we just should be like love and happiness, and because the world is not love and happiness, we have to be honest about that. But I ask, is promoting dysfunctional relationships and talking about your car and, only talking about like
romance,
our lives are bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
Our lives are bigger than your last boyfriend. And I'm not saying you can't talk about it. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be there at all.
I don't hear you saying that. I hear
I'm
you
just saying
we should want more than that from our expression, and not flatten our experience into this little range
exactly where you have 7 songs about your breakup, or 10 songs about how many cars you have. It's like you should have 1 song about that and 6 songs about all of the things that you're seeing that could change in the world.
Yeah.
And if you're living your life so that actually you're spending all day looking at your 10 cars, well, I'm also sorry, because I can't imagine that that's a really, truly fulfilled life. And I would love if there's an artist out there that says, I can't write anything different because that's what I'm living all day. Call me. We can talk. I can introduce you to a fuller life than that, where you go see people in the hospital and you see them find grace in the midst of cancer. Or you just go to the park and you see little kids struggling to learn how to like walk and grow. And there's so much beauty and struggle in the world that should be talked about.
Yeah.
That I just struggle sometimes with what feels like an excessive amount of idle chatter. We all need a little idle chatter. We all have a stupid television show that we watch. I'm not going to, deny that that's true.
Yeah. But what's real?
And the reality is that, within the rap industry, a big piece of this, and this is what's really scary and, problematic, and again comes back to this issue of race. The primary consumers of rap music are young white males.
Huh.
So a lot of rappers are creating an image of blackness for those young white males to consume.
Wow.
And unfortunately, that is the image of blackness that they buy the most. So we also need to talk about, why is that the image of Black people when you don't know any Black people that you want to consume? And could I interest you in buying music that actually talks about the fullness of Black humanity, which is a lot more than the snippets that you're purchasing at, downloading from iTunes or whatever.
And that pushes you beyond a little hashtag of Black Lives Matter, even though that's important.
Yeah.
Those movements are important, but I've heard a lot of people saying things like, well, all lives matter. We want to change it to be more inclusive. But there is something very special and particular about looking at real experiences in real lives that come from real contexts.
Yeah.
And in this interview in the last episode, we talked a lot about Black civil rights in particular, because there's a wealth of information. There's a lot of people groups that are still fighting to be recognized at all.
Right.
And so that deserves to be noted. But I have been so thankful to hear your perspective and just the wealth of wisdom that you bring. And I wish you so much luck in your future work. And I can't wait to see what else you do just in your fearlessness. It's awesome.
Well, I thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I need to give credit where credit is due. I mean, I think I started this segment with this, and it's so true. There are so many people, some with high degrees, some with no degrees, the folks that worked in the cafeteria where I went to school, who have invested in me and hoped that I could be something better in the world. Part of my work is to just keep trying to honor that every day. And truly, I don't think of myself as special. I just keep thinking, like, if everybody got this level of support, oh my gosh, what would the world be? We're going to have struggles. But if people just believe that you are capable of overcoming these things, that you are strong and beautiful and worthy of their investment, then even when tough things happen to you, you can push past them. Because when that many people believe in you, you begin to believe in yourself. And so the reality is, for so many Black people, I think why we need to hear Black Lives Matter is because there's been so many other messages that say that they don't.
Yeah.
And before we go global and say all lives matter, there's a lot of Black people who need to hear that it matters to us if you're gunned down in the street. And it matters to us if you can't get a job because people always think that you're too Black or too dumb or whatever it is that their stereotypes are. Human beings need to feel that they matter. And some humans have been told that they don't matter. And so I'm down for Asian lives matter, all sorts of lives matter. But I don't want to say all, because that might just bury again those people who have been deeply wounded and hurt. We need to meet and connect with and talk to people who have been deeply hurt. And again, begin that healing process of saying, what has happened to you is not right. I can't fix all of the past, but I'm sorry. And I want to go forward and make something new happen.
Yeah.
And if we can do that in so many different ways, if we could really bring our full selves to making that apology and be committed to changing, to living into this better world that I believe we all really want, I hope I can live to see that. It's powerful. I get to see it in small ways all the time. But my hope is still that in many small places, it would begin to amount to something that would turn this country upside down.
Right on. I am so excited for that too, and I hope it deeply. I am almost speechless. I've been so moved by this interview. Thank you so much.
Well, thank
for your time. Thank you so much, and it's an honor to know you, and I hope we hear from you again if that's a thing that can happen in the future. So
sounds good. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mariama. And for those of our listeners, we will be back to our regular programming on Tuesday. Thanks, and have a great day.